All right, we're going to bring in a good friend, Tom Wolf. I was so disappointed in you. We all went to breakfast this morning. Nick and I ate relatively healthy. You went big. I mean, you went big,
I tried to.
and you,
Tried to.
you left a lot on the table. What's going on?
I don't know. It just kept coming at me. She kept saying toast. You want pancakes? You want eggs? You want coffee? Like I got overwhelmed. I gave Nick a look, and he kind of gave me the nod. Like I know, I've been here
It's
before.
a lot.
So,
It's a lot.
yeah.
All right, so what agents? What I want to get into first, and what our listeners need to understand, and obviously, commercial real estate is different than residential real estate, and commercial agents like yourself, when all of us are reeling and dealing with all of these changes, you guys are like, "What's the big
Laughing.
deal?" Because that's how we've always done it. And so there's the way that compensation conversations and negotiations take place in commercial are obviously different than residential. But let's talk about what those differences are.
Sure. So you said conversations around compensation. And that's got to be where it starts, right? So I think the biggest thing is that in our industry, compensation, commission, whatever you want to call it,
BIPs.
BIPs. It's not a dirty word in commercial, and I know that sounds weird, like dirty word. What do you mean? So, in the agents that I talk to, like in the residential world, one of the biggest sources of angst that they're having is just talking about their compensation up front now with their clients. They feel uncomfortable with it, which I think kind of highlights in some ways an issue that we had before all of this change, right? That never should have been the case. Talking about compensation never should have felt uncomfortable to people. We're all paid, right? It shows up on the final settlement statement. Why couldn't that conversation take place earlier with your client? And so when I transitioned into commercial real estate about 10 years ago, that was admittedly a big change for me. It's like, oh my gosh, we put our compensation right in our offers, we put them in our LOS, all those things took place. And really, what I quickly noticed is that our buyers, they didn't blink. Our tenants, they didn't blink when we'd have these conversations with them. As long as you could demonstrate value, and I think in the commercial world, there is a lot of value in the way your buyer and your tenant rep brings to the table. And it's no different than residential.
So in the old days for us, and like I said, it was never a foregone conclusion, but it was a safe assumption that the seller was going to pay the buyer broker compensation. Is that the same? Is that same assumption hold true in commercial, or is it just it varies?
So it doesn't vary as much as people would think. There are some misconceptions about how much it varies in commercial real estate. We have found that, which is ironic because in commercial, our buyers and tenants probably have more ability to compensate their own buyer broker, their tenant broker, than even in the residential world, say like a first-time home buyer could. I mean, we work with companies, corporations, things like that, which are probably prepared to pay some of those costs. And you'd be surprised how much or how often they're not. So it is still very common for the seller to be offering that compensation.
All right. So then when you're having because we're wanting to kind of take some of these strategies and some of the ways that commercial works and apply to how we have these conversations. So when I come to you and I'm a new client, I'm either a commercial lease or let's say I'm buying a storefront or whatever the case is. At what point does compensation come up, and how is that explained?
It would come up in exactly the same way. It still comes up in the terms of a buyer broker agreement, a tenant broker agreement, and how that compensation looks. And then they also get exposed to that very early on in our offer process. So like we can provide them with a sample letter of intent. So a letter of intent is just akin to putting an offer on a residential house. It's the same thing. It's a little less formal, but our compensation is always in our letters of intent, for example. And we show them those samples of what that looks like, what a 3-page letter of intent looks like. And right there at the bottom says who we represent, what our compensation will be. So,
And does it say who's paying for it?
it does. Well, in the buyer broker, it says who's paying for it. In the letter of intent, it also says that, and it's always the landlord or the seller that we are asking to pay for that amount. And we typically know upfront what that amount's going to be. We do some research on that, but not always.
Yeah, because that was my next question. So what we're all scrambling to do is I got a client that wants to buy 123 East Main Street, and and now, I do have a buyer broker agreement in place, and now we're calling listing agents or texting listing agents and saying, hey, is there any buyer broker compensation on the table? Or do you guys do the same thing, or you just submitting? Because what we're telling agents to do doesn't matter what the seller says, doesn't matter what the listing agent says. Still put together the seller compensation addendum and put what you want, what you've negotiated. Hey, see what I did there?
I know you're doing great,
All
Mike.
right.
That was good,
See
Mike.
what you negotiated, with the buyer, and just send it over there with the offer.
Yeah. So I would say about on the offers like we receive, for example, probably 50% of the time, they are calling right before writing the offer to us to ask what the comp is going to be. I would say 0% of the time are they calling before showing one of our properties. And we're the same way. When we were representing a buyer or a tenant, we never call in advance to ask what that comp is going to be on that property we're showing.
So let me ask you a question. CoStar, which is the commercial practitioner's armless, and LoopNet, which is the commercial practitioner's Zillow. The question that I have is, was the compensation on commercial property offered in the offering of the property? Is it in CoStar or not?
It's not. No.
Right. And has it ever been?
No, not
Okay.
not my time practicing.
So in essence, what I'm trying to help everybody understand is what's new is we just don't have ours in the MLS, where you never had it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, so it was never in.
Never.
Never. No, it was never in there. So, some
Okay.
commercial properties have been on the MLS, but a tiny fraction of them, 5% are on the MLS, 95% are on CoStar, and it's never been listed. And, it's interesting. I think a lot of this fear is just because things are so new and things are rapidly changing. Everyone's trying to figure out how to deal with all these changes. I think it's important to understand that things will normalize.
Mm-hmm.
Things will calm down. And yeah, they will shift with the markets, buyer's market, seller's market. Yeah, we're going to see changes in how compensation is offered on properties, but things will settle down. Commercial real estate, it's not the wild, wild west that everyone thinks it is. Actually, things are pretty predictable in our world once you've been doing it for a while. And we really aren't going into deal by deal, just like wringing our hands. Are we going to get paid? How's this going to work? Things like that. Things are pretty predictable and stable in there. And yeah, we have protections in place through our buyer broker, of course. And we use those for multiple reasons. It's not just compensation. I mean, people should be really excited about these buyer broker agreements because, frankly, it's exclusivity. It's something that you haven't had historically if you haven't been using these. And, when I first heard this rule come out, I'm like, agents should be really excited about this because now they're not put in a position to even have to be the only one asking for this.
Yep.
They get the assurance, possibly, if they get an exclusive buyer broker agreement, to know that, hey, this person's going to be loyal to me, at least for the length of this. That's a good thing.
Okay, I totally understand it, and I 100% agree with it. The angst is agents are overwhelmed and just, I don't know, intimidated by explaining to a buyer that they might have to pay. And so the exclusivity, I think we all get that. We all get that. It's a great thing. It's nice to know that this client can't cheat on me. But on that initial consultation, especially if I don't have a strong relationship with that client, I have to explain to the buyer, in the event that the seller refuses to pay any type of compensation, you're going to have to pay.
So I'm going to disagree with that just a little bit. I look at the buyer broker and the amount of compensation that's in there as the amount that your buyer is authorizing you to get paid versus the amount they're agreeing to pay you. Because let's be honest, I think a lot of people may be signing this buyer broker who don't have the ability to pay the amount that they're signing up for. And the assumption is always like, well, that's the amount they're agreeing to pay you. I don't know that a lot of buyers are going to be able to pay what they're agreeing to on the buyer broker. I think that's saying, we're going to work with you, and we authorize you to get compensated.
I'm writing that down, Tom.
That's pretty
is,
good.
I now feel bad making fun of you not eating your entire breakfast.
Yeah. So Tom, tell us,
love that.
prior to August 1st, in the commercial world, you've been using engagement letters for a long time.
Absolutely.
So, and again, in the residential resale world, when that document came out in the late 90s, we embraced it because my team and the people that in the businesses that I was involved in was on the buyer side of new home sales. So again, same kind of thing. We had to establish with the builder right up front what we, and the client, what we thought we wanted to get paid. Mike, you worked with us a lot of times, and so you were in that new home world, and you knew.
So I sold half a Buckeye.
I know you
I
did.
was my middle name. I changed my middle name to Sundance.
To Sundance, there you go. And so, but the point that I'm trying to make is once we introduced that buyer broker agreement, we didn't have to worry anymore about giving the consumer the location of the builder because they were now engaged with us and they said, this is the maximum we're going to pay you. And a great comment, I don't remember who created it, but it was, and if you go in or if you do business without us, you waive your rights to have an opportunity for the seller to pay your compensation.
All right, so I wanted to go back to something that Tom said. One of the biggest differences, and I just don't want to gloss over it, but it was you don't in your world, in your space, you're not having conversations with the listing agent about compensation till after your client has actually seen the property. You're calling, you're finding that out, as you're now negotiating. What we're doing right now, and I'm seeing it, I've had listings where agents are doing this, is they're so focused on their compensation that they're trying to ensure that there's a buyer broker on the table before seeing the property. And I think that's bad optics. I've got a listing down in Casa Grande, and we're just not disclosing what that compensation is because our sellers aren't signing the buyer broker compensation portion because it's going to be based on the strength of the offer. And this agent said, well, if you're not going to tell me, I'm not going to show the property. That's a problem.
It is, and I don't know if that difference is just because agents are very fearful that there's this huge glut of sellers out there who are not willing to offer some type of compensation, and so they think like, listen, I'm not going to get compensated on half of these properties if we go try and do a deal on them. And I don't know what the reality looks like yet. I don't think any of us do. Maybe it's because, like we've talked about, commercial has done it this different way for so long that I mentioned earlier, there is some predictability and stability in our commercial marketplace. I think that will come to residential at some point.
I agree.
And I think those calls and texts in advance will fall off as people get comfort level with this new system. So I think it's completely driven by just the relative newness of all of this. And I don't think you're going to see that as an issue, 2 years from today.
So we get to kind of see behind the curtain of the offers that are being submitted from West USA agents. Our processing team is doing a really good job of keeping eyes on these things, and that's one of the things we're looking at. How often is there no compensation being offered by the seller side? And I haven't had one yet come across my desk. And so I think that's the doom and gloom scenario that we all get so worked up on, that there is no compensation being offered, and I'm going to have to figure this out. But they're just not walking through it. So they're head in the sand hiding, and that's why I was really excited when Tom, you were able to come on, because you are our day walker here at West USA. You do a lot of commercial, but you are also a residential guy too, and so you do both types. So having your insight into this, and I think you nailed. Well, you've getting a lot of love from the people on the podcast today. You're dropping nuggets today, but the consistency will show up for the residential world, and I think we'll see it in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. Remember, we still have the buyer broker to show out there, and and that's kind of a soft landing document for you guys. If you can't negotiate into a full, exclusive, locked-in relationship that no matter who they buy from, you get paid, you should at least engage with that buyer broker to show document and say to somebody, you know what, I don't know if I like you, and you don't know if you like me. This buyer broker to show gives us an opportunity to look at some houses today, have some conversations, and if at the end of the day you like how I am working on your behalf or my methodology, then I'd like to engage in signing an exclusive buyer broker agreement with you. There is that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, okay, yeah, never mind. I don't want to say anything to get us in trouble. So I'm going to move right. I'm going to move along. All right. So we got a comment in from one of our agents, Helen. Is fair assessment that there's just this, I'm not going to say expectation, but this understanding that if you are a commercial client, that your your agent is going to get paid. Like, this is the commercial world. That their services are different. They're not going to work for free, and so forth, as opposed to the different, appearance in residential where buyers just don't understand it. I don't know if that question makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. I
I'm gonna
think
go
what
back
they're-
and read the
what they're
question.
yeah, I mean, I think what they're touching on is that
Okay, no, it's the expectation of needing. Like, I need representation as a buyer if I'm going to do commercial, whereas a lot of buyers in residential right now going, I don't know if I need representation.
Okay, so first of all, I want to say that there are buyers and tenants on the commercial side who start with the mindset that they can do this themselves. A lot of people who come to us have already been searching on their own, calling on signs, blah blah blah. I thought that wouldn't be the case when I got into commercial. Absolutely not true. A lot of people still try to do it themselves, think they can go direct to the listing broker. Happens all the time. So let's dispel that myth that part is different in commercial. As far as our clients thinking that they need us and they rely on our representation and that will be paid accordingly, yeah, that's absolutely the case. But why would that be any different than residential? Again, it's just how we put ourselves out there, how we discuss compensation up front, and I just see too many residential agents who almost, I hate to say it like this, but like they almost aren't sure that they're worth what they're asking for. I think, to put it bluntly, and they kind of hide from that conversation. And before, you got to make it all the way to the closing table, right? Before anyone saw that number, and you kind of could ride off into the sunset and you'd be okay. So, but now I just think it's important. They're just really uncomfortable having it up front. They're super uncomfortable if they think that compensation may come up during a negotiation and actually get in the way of their client getting a property. All of those things are just really what I think are causing that concern. And agents just have to get comfortable that they're worth X, whatever X is for them, and they need to stand behind that and become really comfortable explaining that to their client.
So the two processes, Mike and Tom, are, okay, they engage with you up front doing a search. And then at what time does your value proposition take over? Like, for instance, are we really, thinking we're only being paid because we have captive and MLS and as a result, you need to come to me to find the product? Or are we being paid where, yeah, you know what, there is a value, a convenience factor that's built into me being able to do that? How did that commercial search go for you, by the way? They come up to the realization it didn't go very well. I can't seem to either get to talk to the other people or whatnot, or I'm not seeing everything that's out there. Okay, and then they engage with you, they see that they can get that convenience, and then your prowess, to Mike's three-pack, your prowess, your ability to negotiate, your ability to identify if a particular commercial property, in this example, meets the criteria or could be transformed into the criteria that the client needs. Yes, that's where your big commercial prowess comes into play. How does that, in your world, differentiate between those same two factors in the residential world?
So that comes up immediately. So I've said on a previous podcast, one of the big things that we do with every client is we do an intake. 100% of the time we do an intake, and that's something I encourage every residential agent to do. Intake, it can be on the phone, it can be on the call, but a big part of our intake is not just getting to know the client, but we go through in big detail what Todd just talked about, like how we vet our properties, how we make sure these properties are going to be a fit, and it is a big process. And when they hear that, they hear what we do behind the scenes, and we let them know, like, this is what's happening behind the curtain. This is going to take 4 days. Here's what we're doing for those 4 days. Here's the process. They understand pretty quick, like, hey, that's something I would not want to do myself. That is something that I absolutely want representation with. We bring up pitfalls in there. We storify. All of those things come up during that intake call. And so I think they realize pretty quickly where the value is, and and why we're worth the compensation that we're
And
that
do
we're
you do
charging.
that the same thing with your residential clients?
Yeah. Not well. Actually, that's not true. Not as consistently, truthfully. I mean, I think it's just because these days I walk much more in the commercial world, and it's actually funny now when I take a residential client. It's gotten to be the more awkward side of things. I'm like, I remembered how to do this once upon a time, right?
Yeah.
But yes, there is still an intake, but it's just not as detailed, and so we're just not as polished, I would say, Todd, as providing that. But I think the agents who have been doing this for a long time, they know how to present that value. And I think a lot of people have thought that these changes, the cream would rise to the crop, right? Or cream would rise to the top. Let's get that out. So I think that is true because when you have that experience to talk about that, your value is going to be obvious without,
Yeah, we knew it was getting awkward for Tom this week, and he texts me. He says, "I got a new residential buyer," and he goes, "I'm on the MLS. I can't find the buyer broker amount," and so.
Yeah, joke.
All right, so your your buyer intake. Okay, for in our world or in my world, we would call it a new buyer consult. How long is that?
it usually takes 15 minutes roughly in a phone call.
Really?
We get through it pretty quick. And so a lot of the people that we work with, I mean, everyone's busy, right? But a lot of our business owners, they don't have a ton of time. It's almost always done on the phone. A business owner is typically not going to want to come down to our office. And so I think I think the nature of the client's a little bit different, but yeah, it's usually about 15 to 20 minutes. We have very specific intakes depending on the type of client that they are. We ask different questions to different clients, so it's not the same one every time. And through that intake, and I think through the questions we ask also, they understand that we know what we're talking about and what we're doing.
Yeah.
Because when they hear these questions, they're like, oh, I never thought of that. Oh, I never thought of that.
That
Like,
goes back to our 27 questions for unrepresented buyers. I mean, we give that to a buyer, and they're like, "Oh my God, I haven't thought about all this stuff."
100%. Yeah, no. Yeah, the right questions can go a long way.
All right, so before I go into my next question, because I know we've got a few minutes left, you got a nice little pretty piece of paper over there. Did you have anything specific on there you wanted to highlight?
No, I mean, you've asked me most of the questions on here. I mean, I think I've kind of, to beat that horse to death, of just the comfort level with compensation conversations. And my hope for agents is that they can get really comfortable with that through this process and understand that they do deserve to get paid for what they do. And that we don't do this for free. This is a profession, and it's okay for our clients to understand that.
All right, so my last question for you. So I think having these compensation conversations with buyers, it comes, the more comfortable you are with it, the more comfortable you are, and the easier that these conversations become. And I think that comes from confidence. Like, I've been doing this. I know what I'm doing. This is what I bring to the table. And that really becomes that proposition value that you have. And so agents who don't have a lot of experience and don't have that confidence are the ones that are having a harder time with the buyer broker agreement conversation. So we get that. So you're a bad mamma jamma. Like, I mean, I send all my commercial referrals to you and everything because I just know that they're going to be taken care of and they're going to have, incredible representation. But what is why you? What is your value proposition? Like, you're going to sit down, I'm a new commercial client or I'm a new residential client. Why you? Why Tom Wolf?
Like, why work with us?
Yeah.
First of all, I think that we demonstrate really quickly, all the different types of clients that we're able to help, all the different types of situations, and we can explain to them pretty quickly the complexities of what they're about to go through. And, again, we've already said this, the questions we ask, the things we talk about, I think make them understand pretty quickly, like, hey, this guy has the experience. It's obvious. He knows what he's doing. And we get a lot of referrals, for a lot of reasons. It's not just because of our experience, but it's also because we've developed processes that work for like the tiniest client, the biggest client. We don't turn people away. Agents refer to us because, they'll send us a client that, offers compensation that's lunch money, almost, and we handle that client with the same care that we handle the $10 million the buyer, and it's because we have a process for dealing with that, okay? And you have to have that process. And I decided early on, because we would get a lot of those smaller referrals, and I decided early on, like, wow, these are really taking a lot of time and bogging us down, but I don't want to turn them away. So we really need a process for how do we handle these people quickly, efficiently, still give them good service. So I think that's why us. We've really developed the processes to be able to handle just about anybody.
So do you spend time talking about why you before you engage with the consumer, or do you find out all those questions of what they're looking for, so that you can understand what that job is going to be, and then at that point explain either through story or procedure the how you can help them achieve that, and then through that that you earn that value prop. You're not trying to like say, hey, I'm a professional, here's why you need to pay me. You're saying, hey, here's what do you need? And then after hearing what they need, you go into explaining what your system is that validates what you might be worth.
Absolutely. I mean, we start with the point of from a point of discovery with every client, and I go into every client intake, and so does my team members, of like let's learn as much as we can about this client. That's why we ask very different questions to different. Obviously we start every call with some idea of what they're trying to do, like on a very high level. Maybe the referral source will say, hey, we have a client who's looking for a Pilates studio. Just making that up. Okay, so I don't have a Pilates studio intake. I'm not that specific, but we have an intake that would be in that general view. So, we can start with those type of questions and start with that discovery. And then from there, once we hear their responses to those questions, then we can kind of tailor, what we do that would be a good fit for them.
Alrighty, so I know a lot of you guys out there. We see it periodically going on the West USA Facebook groups. Who do I refer commercial business to? And you'll commonly see everybody going Tom Wolf, Tom Wolf. So you have his email address up on the screen and the phone number. So if you got any questions about commercial, have any clients that are looking to do commercial, definitely want to talk to Tom. It's great if you end up going to a breakfast or lunch with him. You're safe to just split a meal, because Tom's not going to eat the whole thing.
I offered to you today, by the way.
You did, actually.
You did.
Right?
You did.
I was actually begging for help.
Well, yeah. Well, Nick orders off the kids menu, so
There it was.
there it was. It's been, all right. Leave you with the quote of the day: even if you fall on your face, you're still moving forward. Appreciate everybody joining us today. Go out and sell a home.